When Magic started, if you played with sleeves, you were considered a weirdo. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, and welcome to my video on 25 years of sleeves, the evolution of sleeves in Magic the Gathering. It's an interesting story. I've been around since the beginning, so I've watched this all happen. Now, at the very beginning of Magic, nobody I knew used sleeves. Nobody had sleeves whatsoever. The only sleeves that were used in any regard were used by the store, and those are penny sleeves, which everybody's familiar with, to store singles for sales. That's it. And then occasionally a top loader. You guys know those rigid firm things that you slide that into? That they would be used for more expensive cards, like your Black Lotus or whatever. And that was the entirety of it, right? At the beginning, that was it. We didn't have all the Dragon Shields and all those other products that existed. In fact, there were no sleeves specifically designed for Magic at all, right? All card storage products were at the time meant to be used for sports cards. And you don't play games with sports cards. Those are just stored, right? So the whole point is just to have something to keep them safe. And penny sleeves were perfectly suitable for that. In terms of using them for Magic decks, anybody who's tried it knows they're terrible. They're terrible for shuffling. They get damaged easily. They get all bent up. They are really not ideal. I mean, they're a step up from having an unsleeved deck, which I know very well because we played for a long period of time where nobody used sleeves. And there are serious problems with not playing with sleeves, guys. Cards get beat up, and they get beat up to different degrees. If all the cards in your deck got beat up to the same degree and you couldn't tell them apart, that's not a problem. But that's not how it worked at all. I remember specifically knowing what the beat patterning on the back of my Sol Ring looked like. And that's because Sol Ring gets a ton of play. I mean, a one-mana artifact that taps for 2 colorless, hits the board, you're using it a lot. So the back of it gets scuffed up, right? We had no playmats, no sleeves. So after a bit, some kids, not too many, but you'd find a few people were starting to use dollar sleeves. They started to experiment with different ways to protect their deck. Now, the dollar sleeves, as I mentioned before, didn't work very well. They split easily, they're cheap, they're not meant for shuffling, they're a nightmare. Now, there were sleeves, there was a step between the dollar penny sleeves and the full-on rigid top loaders, because some people did try with the rigid top loaders. Some people did build decks with those, and their decks were this big, and shuffling them was a nightmare. I remember specifically playing against people in events where they had their decks in those, and whenever you had to do something like Jester's Cap or go through the deck, it was really annoying. So the midway between that were these really thick translucent sleeves that had these little hologram foils, and the problem with this is the holograms were placed in a way, they were designed for sports cards, as I said. Nothing existed for Magic. So the holograms on these would be sometimes in places that would obscure important information on the card. So they were, in some ways, they were less ideal, but they still were better than penny sleeves and not as annoying to deal with top loaders. But they had their own problems as well. They were very puffy. They were like 2 hard pieces of plastic sealed along the edge almost, where it's not quite a top loader. It's like a top loader with more flexibility, not as rigid, but because of that, it bubbles out and is actually, in a way, almost thicker than a top loader, but you can compress it down into something more reasonable. So when you're shuffling, it's a little bit easier. But the biggest problem with those sleeves is they were never meant for shuffling. So the outer surface had no protection on them, and they got scuffed like nobody's business. After the first time of shuffling these sleeves, they would be considerably not new. Now, I'll say the one advantage they had over the new sleeves, you know, when you get new sleeves and you sleeve up your deck, you put it down, you try shuffling it, and it's slippery as an eel, it's sliding all over the table. You never had to deal with that with those puffy sleeves. But, I mean, they obscured information, they got scuffed as hell, so they looked like garbage. So again, not an ideal situation. So that's what we started out with before anything like Dragon Shields or anything like that came along. And it was a long time before those products really showed up, before somebody realized, hey, we need to make sleeves specifically for Magic players with them in mind. And when they did that, obviously, that was a huge improvement. The funny thing is there have been a number of rules about sleeves. I mean, some of them make sense in terms of you should always use just a solid colored black sleeve. You can't use something with a picture of a dragon or something because it's really easy to just add a little bit of extra shading somewhere that you can tell. So essentially you can use that artwork to mark your cards. So sleeves could be used in an illegal sense in that way. So at the beginning of Magic, people thought that people using sleeves were weird. And then it slowly kind of gained acceptance as more and more people realized, okay, you know what, I don't want to beat up my cards. Like when we all started, nobody cared about beating up your cards. We never thought this is going to be a 25-year long game and these will all be worth money. It was just like playing any other game. What would you care? Like you don't go and buy a deck of bicycle playing cards and go, I better protect these for future. You know what I mean? It's just not something most people think about. So we didn't really care about it. So I have buddies who are like, I found an old bin of cards and they found Moxes that are almost unrecognizable from how beat up they are. But so you can see there are reasons why sleeves are advantageous. Now, throughout the history of sleeves, they've slowly but surely moved up to the point where we have now, where you have your dragon shields, you have your other shields on the same level as dragon shields or better, depending. There are different quality levels. In all honesty, I'm not an expert on the different levels because I don't play enough competitive tournament Magic that I don't give a shit about what kind of sleeves. I tend to actually pick sleeves with nice artwork on the back because I know I'm just going to be using it for fun play. Like I'm not worried about ever having to use it in a competitive sense. And so I also, because I don't, when I build the deck, I tend not to play it very frequently. So I also don't have to worry over much about the durability of the sleeves. They just have to be at a reasonable level. So for me, dragon shields are about where I hit and go, you know what, these are fine, these are suitable, they have a good lifespan, I have no problems with them. I'm sure there are people out there who know better sleeves, but to me, that's like where we're currently standing as like a standardized sort of acceptable sleeve without real, like, there's not real defects with it. They're not like some cheap Chinese sleeves. You do have sleeves coming in from different places. And then the most interesting part, and I never would have expected this, was the evolution of like the perfect fit sleeve. Now these, I like them. I really enjoy the way that they fit the card perfectly. It feels right. It's a satisfying feeling. But what people do is they put them in the perfect fit and then they put another sleeve on top of that. And that way basically you put the perfect fit this way. And that way when you put the card into the sleeve, the top of the perfect fit is the sealed edge is at the open edge of the regular sleeve. So you have made, like, even if water went into it, it would go down and spill over the card instead of inside with the card. So that's the point of the perfect fits. And it's crazy to see all the steps. We started out where people didn't use sleeves at all. We went penny sleeves, we went weird thick sleeves, we went top loaders, and then we started to move into regular sleeves all the way up to perfect fit. No idea what can come next, if anything. Are we going to develop a third outer sleeve? Is that where we're going? It's curious, but there's an interesting situation that happened throughout the history of Magic, because there was at one point, and this is weird, at one point it was a tournament rule. If you were in a big tournament somewhere and you were playing sleeves, your opponent, like if you're playing a sleeved deck, I had the right to say you have to play de-sleeved. It was like, now you have to play with sleeves, right? But back then it was a situation where no, you're actually, sleeves are allowed only if your opponent doesn't have an objection to it. So if your opponent objects to the sleeves, you must play de-sleeved. Which you think, okay, well, what does that really matter? Who cares? How often is that going to come up aside from someone who's just being a jerk, right? Well, the most amazing thing happened where people used this to metagame the system, essentially, and to force people who had Power 9 and things like that to stop bringing them to events. It was to stop using them in tournaments. It was an amazing answer. Somebody found a 25-cent answer to Black Lotus Ancestral Time Log, and it's kind of genius in a way, all right? It's called Soldier of Fortune. It's 1 red, and it's 1/1, right? And its ability is pay 1 red and tap it. Target player shuffles their deck. Now, back then, when it's time for your deck to be shuffled, I get to shuffle it if I want, right? And I'm allowed to rifle shuffle it, riffle shuffle it, whatever term you want to use for it. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but that's where you take the cards and you bend them so that they interweave. It's like that grrr, grrr kind of thing. And it's really, really hard on cards, right? And so it's like, okay, I'm going to make you, here it's like, oh, you're playing with power, like all the power cards. I request that you de-sleeve your deck. Now you have to. Now I'm going to play with 4 Soldiers of Fortune, and every turn I'm going to make you shuffle your deck 4 times. This match, I'm going to take hundreds of dollars off the value of your Moxes, your Lotuses. Like, to me, that was incredible. How clever is that? Somebody who didn't have access to those cards went, you know what? I can actually leverage the situation to go, you know, the value, I can use the value of your own cards against you. That is brilliant. I love it. That is my favorite part of the evolution of sleeves. That point in history where you could force your opponent to de-sleeve and then shuffle their deck into garbage if they're playing with valuable cards as a way of balancing out the financial ecosystem. Mwah! Genius. So that has been the evolution of sleeves over 25 years as I have observed it. Thanks for coming by, my friends. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you did like the video. Indicate that with the like indicator. See you next time.
Martin together with the 6 color magic.
We the best magic!